Shalom, Parashat Mishpatim. We are in the midst of an amazing story, the storyline of the giving of the Torah. Within the midst of the excitement, of the amazing scenes of the thunder and lightning on the mountain, we take a pause, a rather long pause, to receive from God a list of laws, all pertaining directly to the behavior that we have towards one another. Mishpatim, laws that relate to social organization and social behavior. The Torah gives us many different perspectives on how humanity is supposed to treat one another. Within this long list of laws, I would like to pull out one particular set of laws and take somewhat of a Hasidic orientation to them. Rabbi Yisrael Miruzhin, one of the great giants of the Hasidic world, my great-great-great-grandfather, pointed out a beautiful idea that relates to what are called the four shomrim. The four different situations by which we find ourselves possessing someone else's property, in which we have particular responsibility towards that property, to watch over it, to make sure that it is safe and secure, and to return it to its owners unharmed. And in fact, if we don't do so, there are penalties and liabilities. The four situations are as follows. A shomer chinam, which simply means one that is asked to watch over another person's property and gets nothing for it. He is not paid, he is merely doing it as a favor. Anyone intuitively would know that, albeit that the person does have liability, his liability is somewhat less. After all, he is not getting paid for this work. The opposite extreme is what is called a shomer sachar, one that is asked to watch over property, but he is paid for his service. Clearly, if one is paid for the service, then he has a greater deal of liability, and he must make sure that the property is unharmed. So in fact, if he was negligent, or if he didn't really go all the way to protect the property, and if it's stolen or damaged, he is liable, and he has to pay for the property that is damaged. The flip side to this situation is one we go out and actually borrow or rent property from another person. So once again, we are actually watching over property that isn't ours. The third situation is called a socher, one that actually rents property from another person. Similar to the shomer sachar, there is a monetary exchange for the property being in your possession, and thus your liability is quite high. The highest of them all, however, is called a shoel. A shoel is one that borrows property. If you borrow property, your liability is complete. And thus, even if something happens that is entirely not your fault, but the property of the person that lent the property to you is damaged, you are fully liable for it. Rabbi Yisrael Miruzhin asked his students a curious question. A question that is one that we could reflect on from many different aspects of our lives. He said, if we examine our relationship with God, man towards his Creator, what kind of contractual relationship do we have? Indeed, did we receive our body for free? Is it a freebie that God gave us, and thus our body is a property of God that we have to return at the end of our lives? Or perhaps the obligation of mitzvot that we have are similar to one that rents property from another, and our mitzvot is a form of payment for our body. Maybe we should ask ourselves that we might find ourselves in a situation of shomer sachar, which means that we actually get paid for our property, for our bodies, because God gave us a wonderful world full of wonderful produce and products to enjoy. He asked them to think carefully about how they would define the nature of our relationship. The students thought long and hard and found themselves divided into three separate camps. One camp argued that we are as a shomer chinam, the other as a shomer sachar, and the third as a socher. Rabbi Yismael smiled at his student and said, but you're all three wrong. Our relationship with God is that of a borrower, a shoel. The students were horrified. Rebbe, they said, if that's the case, even if we tried hard all of our lives to do the right thing and to protect ourselves, if a circumstance happened that is out of our control, we are still liable. Are you saying that we're liable to God even in what is called an onus, an absolute extreme case in which we didn't have any control over it? Smiles the Rebbe and says, my students, you are right with your question. but you forgot one critical element in the laws of the shoel. The borrower indeed is responsible and liable in all circumstances except for one. A nuance in this halacha that is critical for understanding our relationship with God. The Torah tells us, Im be'alav imo lo yeshalem. If the owner of the property that you borrowed is together with you and is using the property together with you, and something happens in which did not involve your direct negligence, then you are not liable because the owner is with you. And thus he assumes the responsibility for the property. Indeed, says Rabbi Ismail Meruzhin, your responsibility throughout your lifetime is to ensure that God is with you. And if God is with you at all times, and you make sure that God is an integral part of your life, indeed, you are not liable for circumstances that are out of your control. That is left to the realm of God. Continues Rabbi Yisrael Meruzhin and says to students, my dear students, live your lives as honestly as you can. Do the best that you can to maximize the gift that God has given you. And always make sure that God is closely with you. And thus you will be protected for the rest of your lives. Shabbat Shalom.